If I know your position on one political issue, I would be willing to start placing bets on your
Mhm.
positions on several other political issues. So if I know you are pro-life, I'll put a big bet down that you defend the Second Amendment. And I bet you're against raising taxes, you're for firm immigration laws, you think racial sensitivity training does more harm than good, the First Amendment is sacred, defunding the police is a disastrous idea, a strong military is our backbone, you probably don't have your pronouns in your bio, and photo ID should definitely be required for voting. On the other hand, if I know you're pro-choice, I'd bet your stance is that guns do more harm than good. You're for heavily taxing the wealthy and think immigration improves the country. The First Amendment is sacred, but there is some language we can mandate be said or not said. Racial sensitivity training can be done right and should be done. Defunding the police is a good idea. The military industrial complexes are a great shame. You're likely to have your pronouns in your bio, and photo ID requirements is a form of voter suppression. So I don't want to stereotype people or create caricatures. And I love and shout out to the people who think in the gray, who think in a nuanced way and who are not extreme. But I do think that there are many people who really do hit on each of those points I just mentioned. And to me, my question, I'll state it, and then I'll just say one more thing and give you the mic. My question is, how much of this conformity and uniformity of political thought can be explained by in-group bias, and how much can be explained by differing value systems between political groups?
Mm-hmm.
So I won't say anything.
Well, obviously, all those positions completely logically cohere. And if you're pro-choice, then you have to be for low taxes. This is the only thing that makes sense.
How can we separate?
Or sorry, high taxes. I got that confused. Yeah, those are good. Although I don't know if most people are pro-choice would have their pronouns. That still seems sort of rare to me, but maybe not. I don't know.
I guess it's a higher likelihood, but you're right.
Definitely way more likely. Yeah, so it's hard to put an exact percentage on it, but I would say the portion that is sort of I would partially call it sort of in-group conformity, but it's a much more complicated process than that. But that is a substantial portion of it. And that other than religious differences between conservatives and liberals, which there are fairly large, conservatives are much more likely to be religious, and religion's a huge part of their lives. And that affects a lot of political judgments and things related to politics. But other than that, I think values are really not that dissimilar between liberals and conservatives. And there's a lot of similarity between the two groups and a lot of differences within the two groups that makes me fairly skeptical of a lot of the arguments that like conservatives and liberals are sort of fundamentally psychologically different. I think there are small differences between them, and those could accumulate in a variety of ways that could compel a liberal. But here's one way I think about it, and this might not be the best way, but I find it to be useful. You know, there aren't two kinds of people. There are millions of kinds of people. And let's pretend they could exist on a spectrum from like red to purple. We'll put them on like a color spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe you're like green. Well, you have to choose between red and purple. So like, which side do you go? Well, you're maybe a little bit closer to purple. So over time you become, you only choose when you choose. So you choose purple. And then over time you become more and more purple, even though you started off green. Right. And so this happens when we identify with a group, when we come to see ourselves as a member of a group. We start to like that group more. We treat the people in that group better. In turn, they treat us better. We want to believe what they believe. And we don't really work hard because this comes naturally, but we sort of situate our whole world so that we are surrounded by people who share those same views, that we're exposed to information that will allow us to have the right beliefs. I think an even better example of this is if you look at different religions. Like, it's not that people who come to believe one religion versus a different religion are so different from one another. It's just that once you're part of a community, believing the right religion is really important. It helps you make friends. It helps you find a romantic partner, perhaps, maybe a little bit less in the US than in some other countries. But historically, whatever the local group that you belong to believed, it was really essential for you to believe what they believe. So we have all of these psychological mechanisms that allow us to conform all of our beliefs and preferences and opinions to whatever the group believes. And I think that's extremely powerful. And I think a lot of people appreciate that reality, but there's still a lot of resistance to the idea. And people want to think that liberals and conservatives are just these like fundamentally different beasts, but I don't see good evidence for it. And I think the differences between the groups are so small that, and as you pointed out in your question, there's really no logically coherent philosophy underlying the set of beliefs that a Democrat would believe or the set that a Republican would believe. So it has to be something more than that. And I think it's really about how we evolved to recruit information and think about information in a way that allows us to adopt the views of our local groups, the groups that we identify with. So I can't put a percentage on it,
right,
but I would say a substantial percentage of it, between 10 and 90%.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, you spoke to that very intelligently. And when you talk about the evolutionary basis of this and how historically it's always been adaptive, of course, to conform to your local group's set of values and standards and beliefs and culture. So, and you've described tribalism as an ineradicable feature of human cognition. And so given this, how should we proceed, and how can we minimize conflict between tribes?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I get asked that a lot, and I never have a good answer. Maybe one day I'll have a good answer. There are a few suggestions that I think are I think I'll write an article about this one day. I'm going to call it Impractical Solutions to Political Polarization. These are all the theoretical ideas that could lead to depolarization, but that will never happen. So like one is having a sort of superordinate identity. So people in the US could identify as people from the United States. But that's become politicized because now conservatives are like patriotic and liberals are like, we hate America. And then you can have a common enemy, which obviously nobody wants. We don't want to have a common enemy. And also COVID could have been an opportunity to have a common enemy, but that became politicized. Whereas liberals were like, wear your mask, and conservatives are like, don't tell me what to do. So that might not ever work. My idea, which we need more empirical support for, but I guess I'm kind of looking at this a little bit in some work, but my idea is to sort of change what people seek acceptance and status for, away from sort of signaling their political identities toward, and I care about this for scientists, but maybe it could work for everyday people too, toward like humility and truth-seeking and openness, and kind of make that be like the cool thing that people attach their identity to. And you can become part of that group and make that be your group identity and make that be the thing that you care about. And I don't know if that's fully possible in politics. It might not be, but I would like to see it among scientists, because a lot of scientists, they're on Twitter and they're just basically political actors. They like engage with politicians and like different political narratives, and they care about policy and they want to like create change. And maybe there's a place for that in science, but I wish most scientists didn't have that as something that they were trying to seek attention for and trying to seek reinforcement for, because I think that turns them into political actors and it interferes with their ability to be a good scientist. So I really want to make this uncertainty and the humility thing to be like the cool thing and make people want to identify with that. It just puzzles me to no end how certain people can be in their political views, given how complicated all of the most complicated political issues are. Nobody has the right answer. If they did, we wouldn't be fighting about it anymore. And so we really should, like, I can believe I have, various political beliefs, but they would never make me hate another person because I have a lot of uncertainty and I'm balancing trade-offs with complicated issues. I understand other people are doing the same thing. And I wish everyone could have that attitude toward their political opponents. And then that would be like a nice first step, is just, let's not agree, but let's agree that it's complicated enough that we don't have to hate each other. Yes. We can just be like, it's really hard. Right. Now, will that ever happen? Probably not. So all of these are my impractical solutions.
They're good. I mean, and the first one you said, the supraordinate identity, that one is really intriguing for me. And especially because I can see, and for some reason my mind always relates it to sports. When I've played sports or watched sports, you can see how, like, for example, with the football team, within the football team, you have different subgroups. You have like the offense and the defense. And at practice, like, we go at each other and it's like serious hostility between the two groups. But then, of course, when it comes time for a scrimmage or a game, we are one unit, we're a team. But then you can see how, like, in college football, you have like the SEC and the different conferences, and there's a shared identity there. And then there's just NCAA athletes, and there's a shared identity there. And then there's just athletes, and there's a shared identity there. And so you can see how it does scale up. It does matter, though, of course, what actually feels meaningful for someone. And it seems that the farther you scale that up and the larger the group gets, the less personally meaningful it becomes for the individual. But I don't know, maybe there's a way that it could become more meaningful, even if you're identifying with a larger group. Granted, that's evolutionarily unprecedented, so we don't really know how the psychology of that would work. And then also, just to comment on the common enemy idea, I've honestly thought about how if aliens showed up and wanted to go to war with us, you would see the greatest unity among humanity ever. We would finally feel like one species, but we don't have that. So we fight amongst each other, kind of like the offense and the defense did at football practice.
I'll add that to my list of impractical solutions. Find the aliens and have them attack us. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like, it does seem to be harder as you grow in size, and it is possible. Or even if we had another species that was competing with us, which we don't, humans basically do what they want with other animals. But if humans had an enemy like that, then they would, countries that don't get along would be forced to get along because they care more about preserving humans than they do, their little bickering matches between them.